So on behalf of the Department of Toxic Substances Control, we would like to welcome you to our public meeting on 1,4-dioxane in personal care and cleaning products. Thank you for participating. My name is Manuel Lopez, and I am a public participation specialist for the Office of Environmental Equity for DPSC. I would also like to acknowledge Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts for allowing us to host this meeting here today. At this time, I would like to introduce Acting Deputy Director of DPSC Safer Products and Workplaces, Carl Palmer.
Thank you, Manuel. Good morning. I just am going to be very brief because there's a lot of good information today that we want to share and hear about. First, I want to echo Manuel's thanks to LA County Sanitation Districts and specifically to Ann Heil for hosting us here. We're glad to be here with all of you. I'm excited to hear from our speakers today. We have a great group of speakers. And we're also excited to share with you our perspective to date on 1,4-dioxane in personal care and cleaning products as an issue that we've been looking at for a while. And the main purpose today is for us to share that information with you here and everyone on the webcast, as well as to hear from you. Because fundamentally, our process is really, the cornerstone of it is information, good science and information, so that we can make the decisions within our Safer Consumer Products framework. You're going to hear in detail from Andre and Ann Cooper about both how our program works and what we've done to date. I really want to encourage everyone, if you haven't already, to read the background document that's posted on our website and to provide us comment through our Health Safer web portal, which you can find on our webpage. I also want to note that we're going to have another workshop on August 21st in Sacramento. It will be a little bit of a deeper dive on some of the issues around that we're going to talk today. And through the end of August, you'll have an opportunity to comment. And it's really important from our perspective to hear from all of you. As I said, information is really the coin of the realm. So we need everyone's perspective so that we can make good decisions and move forward within our framework and to meet our policy objectives. So with that, thanks to our speakers that are here today. We really appreciate people coming from far and wide and people in Europe who are joining us. And again, thanks so much. Looking forward to the dialogue today and moving forward. So with that, I'm going to introduce Andre Algazi. Andre is a senior environmental scientist who leads our chemical product evaluation team. It's a group of scientists and engineers who look at our work plan of potential consumer products containing certain chemicals for identifying what we call priority products. So Andre's going to give an overview of the system, the framework, and we'll go from there. So thanks again.
So thank you, Carl, and good morning, everybody. Do I have the slide advance? So many of you, or some of you, I'm sure, are somewhat familiar with our regulatory framework. For the benefit of everybody, I'd just like to spend a few minutes going over sort of the outline of what the regulatory framework that we're working in is and how what we're talking about today, 1,4-dioxane, fits into the framework. So this chart depicts the 4 steps in the regulatory process. The steps are laid out in framework regulations that we adopted in 2013. And we're implementing a bill that was adopted 5 years prior, AB 1879, which was the Green Chemistry Law. So in the framework regulations, the 4 elements are the chemicals, products, alternative selection and analysis, and regulatory response. The candidate chemicals list is laid out in the framework regulations. And there are 23 source authoritative lists that comprise the candidate chemicals list. We maintain an informational list on our website of all of these chemicals. So a chemical that appears on one or more of these 23 lists is a candidate chemical for the purposes of our program. The blue circles represent the hazard trait lists, so things like carcinogens, mutagens, reproductive toxicants, things like that. The purple circles are the exposure potential lists, and they include chemicals on, for example, 303D list, toxic air contaminants, things like that. So the lists do change, the source lists do change over time as the various bodies that maintain them amend them, and when that happens, then in many cases, our candidate chemicals list changes too, along with it. So 1,4-dioxane is a candidate chemical, and so that brings us to the second column, which is the products column. So identifying a priority product kind of starts with our 3-year priority product work plan. And we're in the second 3-year work plan. Our current work plan covers 2018 to 2020. There are 7 product categories in the work plan. And we've identified 2 product categories where we're concerned about 1,4-dioxane, which is cleaning products and personal care products. So the process of going from the work plan to a specific product chemical combination, and we're not there yet, is sort of a iterative kind of discernment process that includes public engagement like the meeting we're having today from our stakeholders so that we can, as Carl said, make informed decisions. The framework regulations have sort of 2 overarching what are called key prioritization principles that we have to think about in deciding what products to identify as priority products. There has to be potential for exposure to one or more candidate chemicals in the product, and secondly, there needs to be potential for significant or widespread adverse impact resulting from that exposure. So today, we haven't yet focused in on very specific product chemical combinations. So we're going to hear a bit about the types of products and one that we're looking at and the hazards of 1,4-dioxane that we've determined so far. Once we do eventually, assuming we do eventually select a specific 1,4-dioxane containing product in one of these categories, it would become a priority product only after we go through a rulemaking process under the California's Administrative Procedure Act. And again, that's another public comment and sort of public engagement process. So we're in the early stages of the second column, which is priority product selection. We haven't yet selected the product. That's my takeaway from that. So what happens after the rulemaking process is the alternatives analysis, alternative selection, alternatives analysis process. The regulations lay out a 2-stage process that generally people would follow, the manufacturers of a priority product, although there are some other options like product removal or chemical removal or abridged alternatives analysis. But generally speaking, there are two stages, the first of which are identifying a potential alternative, and then the second one, identifying relevant factors for comparison to compare the adverse impacts of the priority product and the alternative and so on. So that is a public process that involves publishing the final alternatives analysis report, receiving public comment, and at the end of that process, we get into the 4th column, regulatory response. And the framework regulations lay out several options for regulatory responses, ranging from we need more information to decide what regulatory response to impose, to potentially a sales restriction or nothing at all. It really just depends. We haven't predetermined at the time even we identify a priority product what we're going to do ultimately as a regulatory response. It really is determined based on the alternatives analysis. So that is really a very kind of nutshell, brief overview of the 4 steps of the SCP regulatory process. We have kind of a little bit more in-depth information available on our website if you're interested and you're not already familiar. So I encourage you to look at the Safer Consumer Products website. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Ann Cooper Doherty, who is the lead of the team that's been doing the work on 1,4-dioxane for the past year or so. And so she'll be giving you an overview of some of the information that you'll also find in our background document. Thank you.
All right, so thanks everyone for coming. So the purpose of today is to hear concerns specifically related to 1,4-dioxane and consumer products, specifically the potential for adverse impacts, concerns associated with 1,4-dioxane in wastewater, and potential impacts of 1,4-dioxane on the beneficial reuse of wastewater. So the format for the rest of the morning, I'm going to go over a brief overview of kind of the research that we've done. That includes presence in products, exposure concerns, and potential for adverse impacts. And as Andre mentioned, we've got more information on that in our background document. which is actually in the back of the room, but also online. We're going to have a series of stakeholder presentations, and we are going to have a quick break in the middle of that just for planning purposes. And then we have a general public comment period. If you're here in person and want to provide a comment, please make sure to turn in your comment card to one of our staff. And if you're online, please email our Safer Consumer Products at dtsc.ca.gov email address. So I'll just start with a few basics about 1,4-dioxane. As you can see in the top right corner, the structure, it is a very small chemical that's highly soluble in water, and it's persistent in water, which means it's not easily broken down. We know that it can volatilize, which means that it can be inhaled. The United States Environmental Protection Agency indicates that it's a likely carcinogen, and the National Toxicology Program indicates that this is by any route of exposure. We know it doesn't stick to solids, and this includes things like water filters or Brita filters, as well as particulates that might be removed during the wastewater treatment plant process. And as a result of that, we know that most standard forms of water treatment actually do not remove it. So Andre mentioned our priority product work plan. Within that work plan, there's 2 product categories that we're most interested in. The first is cleaning products, including things like laundry detergents and dish detergents. And the second is beauty, personal care, and hygiene products, things like shampoo and body wash and cosmetics. And we're really focusing on these 2 consumer product categories because of their widespread use, their potential to contain 1,4-dioxane, and the fact that they're released down the drain after use. So determining which products contain 1,4-dioxane and at what concentration can be difficult because it's a contaminant, which means it's not intentionally added to the personal care and cleaning products it's used in. And instead, it's formed in the production of ethoxylated surfactants and other raw materials. So it's not included on the label, but we do know that it's often associated with ingredients that end in or contain the ETH, indicative of the ethoxylation. And chemicals include sodium lauryl sulfate or polyethylene glycols. And we've underlined a few of those chemicals in this example label in the bottom right corner. But those don't always necessarily mean 1,4-dioxane is there. It just might give you an indication. But to that end, DTSC is going to be conducting some of our own product testing in the upcoming few months to try and get a better handle on that. So related to, we have a couple of exposure concerns related to 1,4-dioxane. The first is during product use. So when you're using the product, you can be exposed via inhalation if you're in a hot shower. Dermal, a lot of these products are applied directly to the skin, or even ingestion, as my 2-year-old who drinks his bath water probably experiences. In product use alone, we don't think that for the most of the general population that's going to represent a significant exposure to 1,4-dioxane, but we are concerned about people that have 1,4-dioxane in their drinking water, so they're being exposed to 1,4-dioxane that way as well as through their products, and that's where our concern comes. And then second, we're concerned about end of life. We know it goes down the drain, it goes to the environmental reservoirs, and eventually through the drinking water process where we can be exposed through ingestion. And for all of these exposure pathways, we're most concerned about the general population, and this includes children and other sensitive subpopulations. So to get a little bit more into that environmental reservoir drinking water contamination, I wanted to walk through a graphic to illustrate how 1,4-dioxane from consumer products moves to the waste stream and could potentially impact drinking water. So we know that manufacturers are producing products that unintentionally contain 1,4-dioxane, and they ship them to our communities where we use them. We use them, and then they, of course, go down our pipes to the wastewater treatment plants, where, as we've already discussed, we know that most standard forms of treatment are not effective in removing it. The effluent that's coming out of the wastewater treatment plants can be released to surface water or groundwater, which is then sometimes used for drinking water. And additionally, California is also generating recycled water, which has received additional treatment before being released to groundwater or surface water, which is one reason we're at LA County Sanitation District today. And the intention of this is to supplement drinking water, and this is part of the state's water management strategy. And in the somewhat near future, we'll be taking wastewater treatment effluent, giving it extra treatment, and using it directly as drinking water instead of first releasing it to a groundwater or surface water system. And then, of course, it's treated in a drinking water treatment plant and then delivered back to our communities where we could potentially be exposed to whatever 1,4-dioxane might be in that drinking water. So, and one note on drinking water, we do know that a significant amount of the groundwater and drinking water contamination is most likely a result of historical industrial-related contamination. But we think that this graphic shows the potential for consumer products to contribute to this contamination as well. So related to the presence of 1,4-dioxane in drinking water, there's two data sets that we've consulted. The first is from the United States Environmental Protection Agency's recent survey of drinking water systems. The map on the left shows this data. The background is the population density in California. The darker colors, the darker blues indicate higher population. And then the individual dots are the data points within that survey. And those in red are data points that are above 0.35 micrograms per liter, which is the EPA's health reference concentration. We also looked at the State Water Board's data of drinking water sources and systems, and that's in the table on the right. You can see that a lot of the counties that had concentrations above the 0.35 value overlay and are very similar to those that have exceedances in the EPA's data. And while these are not geographically widespread across the state, if you look at the population column on that table, you can see that these counties represent almost half of the state's population, so that may indicate a potential for widespread exposure. And then I mentioned environmental justice communities, so we're particularly concerned about these communities that might be exposed to 1,4-dioxane from both products and drinking water. And to get a better understanding of this possibility, we looked at the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment's CalEnviroScreen, which is a mapping tool to help identify California communities where people are especially vulnerable to pollution effects. And those communities are indicated by the red shaded areas in the insets on the map. And you can see that some of these communities overlap with the data points from the US EPA survey with exceedances of that health reference concentration. So here we show Sacramento and Monterey counties. And they're particularly relevant for us here today. In this onset, we focused on LA, Orange, and Riverside counties, where we've actually overlaid the US EPA data with the CalEnviroScreen data. And you can see a significant amount of overlap between these communities and samples that exceed the US EPA health reference concentration. Children also represent a sensitive subpopulation that may be particularly vulnerable to the effects of exposure to 1,4-dioxane in consumer products and drinking water. We do know that 1,4-dioxane is present in some products targeted for use by children. And we know that children also have a number of special attributes that make them especially vulnerable. These can include things like different product use patterns. As I mentioned, my son, who loves to drink his bath water. I don't think most adults do that. High surface area to body weight ratio, and they've also got increased diffusion through the skin. And finally, while we're here today, we're concerned about impacts to water treatment agencies. We know that background 1,4-dioxane concentrations in wastewater effluent indicate widespread constant input, such as that might come from consumer products. We know that standard treatments are ineffective, and the specialized treatments that have to be used to remove 1,4-dioxane can be extremely costly. We're particularly concerned about the cost of this specialized treatment on the water treatment agencies that are generating recycled water, and they have to abide by permit requirements related to 1,4-dioxane. So we really don't want 1,4-dioxane to interfere with the beneficial reuse of wastewater and the state's plans to manage our water resources. So with that, we've come up with 3 themes of key questions to stakeholders that we're hoping to get additional information from you on. The first theme is the potential for 1,4-dioxane adverse impacts. That's what we're focused on today. Themes 2 and 3 is related to the presence of 1,4-dioxane in personal care and cleaning products. And then the alternatives analysis threshold. That's a level that we would set if we were to go forward with a priority product. And anyone that makes a product that has a concentration below that level would not have to conduct an alternatives analysis. So those 2 topics are going to be the focus of our workshop on August 21st up in Sacramento, and we invite all of you to join us there as well. We have a CalSafer comment period on our CalSafer website that's open through, we just extended it to August 30th to allow people plenty of time to provide comments based on their own knowledge as well as the 2 workshops. And we're going to be considering this feedback to inform possible priority products that we might potentially list in the future. So with that, we'll take any questions on any of the DTSC presentations that we've heard for the last few minutes. If anyone's got any.
Thank you, Ann Cooper. So we will now transition into stakeholders' presentations. We will start with Professor Thorsten Rinsma of the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research and the University of Leipzig in Germany.
Good morning from Germany. I would like to briefly introduce you to the concept of partially closed water cycles and illustrate the problems that may stem from the presence of persistent and mobile contaminants in such water cycles. So this is a partially closed water cycle. We in our households, as well as industry and cities as a whole, generate wastewater, most of which is actually treated in wastewater treatment plants and then discharged to rivers and streams. In densely populated areas, the percentage of treated wastewater in river waters can easily exceed 20%, especially in dry seasons of the year. Further downstream, the surface water may be used for drinking water production, either after infiltration to the subsurface or bank filtration, or even after direct abstraction. And the water is then treated in the waterworks and comes back to us as the consumers. So this is a partially closed water cycle in which wastewater, after proper treatment, a part of it is coming back to us as consumers in the form of drinking water. In these partially closed water cycles, we basically find three barriers: the wastewater treatment plant, the subsurface, and the waterworks. These are the three barriers which remove contaminants from the water and usually are quite effective in removing all contaminants which originate from the wastewater that we have discharged. However, all three barriers actually rely on the same removal mechanisms, which basically are microbial degradation of organic contaminants and adsorption to surfaces, either to the flocks of deactivated sludge, to the soil, or to activated carbon in the drinking water treatment plant. Unfortunately, in wastewater, we sometimes find components which are neither biodegradable, we call them persistent, and which are so polar that they do not tend to adsorb to surfaces. And then we call them also mobile because they are not removed effectively. Such persistent and mobile contaminants, abbreviated as PM compounds, are not effectively removed by the three barriers, and there is a high risk that these compounds actually move through all these barriers and finally end up in the drinking water, which comes back to us as consumers. Thus, the presence of persistent and mobile compounds in partially closed water cycles clearly limits the reuse options and endangers the water resources. Together with colleagues, we were wondering how many of such PM compounds may be present in our water cycle, and we searched chemical databases, in this case the REACH registry database of the European Union for compounds which may be persistent and mobile according to the criteria which are shown on this slide. We then also checked for the risk of these compounds actually to be emitted into the environment based on the tonnage and the use characteristics of the chemicals. And it turned out that of the about 14,000 chemicals we were initially considering, more than 1,000 PM compounds have a high risk to be emitted into the environment. This for us was an unexpectedly high number of chemicals. One of the major compounds, one of the highly ranked compounds actually in this exercise was 1,4-dioxane, which made us to more closely look onto the properties and the data and more closely look into the studies actually that were available. And it was confirmed in that study then that 1,4-dioxane is indeed persistent and very mobile. It may be worthwhile also to look at its toxicity. And based on the studies, it turned out that 1,4-dioxane would be carcinogenic, class 2, according to the European categorization, meaning that it is considered carcinogenic for humans based on animal data. So obviously, for the resources, for our water resources and the quality of our drinking water, it makes a large difference whether we find only a persistent mobile chemical, a PM chemical, or a compound which is also toxic, a PMT chemical like 1,4-dioxane. Colleagues from the German state Bavaria in southern Germany, they were monitoring their surface waters for the presence of 1,4-dioxane in the past years, and they virtually found 1,4-dioxane everywhere in the surface waters, usually in low concentrations, which suggests that the compound was regularly emitted from municipal wastewater, but in some cases also at very high concentrations of several micrograms per liter. And in these cases, 1,4-dioxane was actually released by industry from production processes. So to conclude, persistent and mobile compounds are an issue in partially closed water cycles. Technical measures to remove these compounds from water are limited because they are not biodegradable and do not sorb to surfaces. And in the case of 1,4-dioxane, often also other oxidative processes are not very effective. The presence of PM compounds in partially closed water cycles endangers drinking water resources and limits wastewater reuse options. This is, of course, especially true for compounds which are also toxic. And one of these examples actually is 1,4-dioxane, at least according to the German environmental agency UBA. Avoiding the release of PMT compounds is probably the most sustainable way to protect our drinking water resources. Thank you. So this is my presentation. I'm not sure that you could hear me.
Yeah. We could, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rinsma. Is there any questions for Professor Rinsma?
Yep. Can you ask him what the measure of the persistence is they used?
Professor, were you able to hear the question?
The measures for the persistency, was that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I had this on one slide, which was maybe shown shortly. There are defined criteria for persistency in the European REACH regulation, which are based on the definitions used for selecting PBT compounds, so the persistent bioaccumulable and toxic compounds. And we actually stick to those criteria also in evaluating the PMT, the persistent mobile and toxic compounds. That is degradation half-life in marine waters, exceeding 60 days, degradation in fresh or estuarine waters exceeding 40 days, and in sediments exceeding 120 days, and in soil also exceeding a time of 120 days.
So can you ask him how this compares to log KW?
Professor Jane Williams is asking, how does this compare to
Log KW. Log KW.
log KW? KLW.
Okay. So mobility actually was measured using the KOC and not the KOW. And the KOC of the log KOC of 1,4-dioxane is 0.8.
We have one more question for you.
Yes, please.
Never mind. Is there any? We do have another question
Just
for you.
whether this is published.
Is this published information, Professor Rinsma?
So the evaluation of these PMT compounds, there's a report which is actually on the slide I'm showing right now. There's a report of the German Environment Agency UBA, and this is available for download. Yes, this is assessment of persistence, mobility, and toxicity of 167 REACH registered substances. That's the title of the study, and that is published.
Were those detections just surface water, or were they also drinking water?
So the data I've shown were only for surface waters, because the colleagues in Bavaria, I think they only sampled surface waters. So I do not have specific data for for groundwater or for drinking water in this case.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Professor Himsa from the audience? Thank you so much for your presentation, Professor.
You're welcome. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we will now hear from Division Engineer of the Reuse and Compliance of Sanitation Districts of Los Angeles County and Hayo.
Thank you for that introduction. Today I'm going to be talking about the sanitation district's experience with 1,4-dioxane. Next slide. Or do I do slides too? Oh, look at that. Okay. So I'm going to cover 3 topics today. I'm going to just start, for those of you not familiar with our agency, with a little bit of an overview of the sanitation districts. Then I'm going to talk about the 1,4-dioxane regulations and how they impact us. And then I want to go over the data that we've collected to date on 1,4-dioxane. So the LA County Sanitation Districts operate a very large interconnected wastewater treatment system in LA County. We serve about half of LA County and have a service area that includes about 5 million people. And as part of our system, we treat about 400 million gallons per day of wastewater at 11 different wastewater treatment plants throughout the county. So our mission is to take that wastewater that's coming into our system and turn it into valuable products. We make recycled water from it. We collect the gases that are given off during the treatment process, and we make energy from it. And then for the solids product that's left over at the end, we make that into fertilizers and different soil amendments. So our entire system is structured in order to maximize production of recycled water. We have several different interconnected areas. One, just have a little light on it. One at the main part of the LA Basin down here, and then one up in the Santa Clarita Valley, and then one up in the Antelope Valley. So what we did when we grew the system was we started with one main treatment plant at the low spot in the LA Basin, and then as the system grew, we put these satellite treatment facilities in order to produce recycled water near the area where it can be best used by our consumers. So 10 of our 11 plants are specifically designed in order to produce recycled water. We're one of the largest suppliers of recycled water in the country, and this recycled water has become a very important supplement to local water supplies, particularly during drought periods. So we have a mature recycled water program that sends water directly to over 800 sites, and we recycle over 100,000 acre-feet per year of water. The highest volume of our recycled water goes to groundwater recharge. Although we do also send it for other things like irrigation, industrial uses, and agricultural uses, and maintaining environmental habitat. So this shows some of our biggest projects that we've got. We've got 2 existing and recycled water projects for groundwater recharge, and 2 that are in development right now. The one shown, Montebello 4 Bay, is our oldest and largest project right now. It was brought online way back in 1962. So what we do at this project, it's actually very sustainable. The water from the treatment plant just behind our building and several other treatment plants flows by gravity down the river to spreading basins. And the water receives additional treatment in the spreading basins as it percolates down through the basins. And we call that soil aquifer treatment. So you don't have to add more chemicals, you don't have to add energy, just let the water flow, nature does its work, and we get good, clean, recycled water out of that. The one on the right on this slide is our Vanderlands water treatment facility. And in this case, we apply, in partnership with the Water Replenishment District, advanced treatment to the water, consisting of microfiltration, reverse osmosis, and advanced oxidation. And then the water is injected directly into the groundwater. So this is very equivalent. Mark Kawamoto is going to talk what they do down in Orange County with our system. And then at the bottom of the slide is one of our new projects that we're working on, and this is a partnership with the Metropolitan Water District. And we are working with them on a project that will provide up to 150 million gallons a day, so about 160,000 acre-feet per year of water that would be receive advanced treatment and then be distributed to groundwater basins around the basin. So this picture is just a demonstration project. It's a 500,000 gallon a day demonstration project to demonstrate the technology, and that we're just wrapping up construction on that and hope to bring it online later this year. So the reason we care about 1,4-dioxane is that it's regulated in our groundwater recharge projects. And the speaker before me talked a little bit about this partially closed water cycle, and that definitely comes down into play down here in the Los Angeles basin. So there are regulations for groundwater recharge using recycled water in California. Those were formalized about 5 years ago. And if you're going to do subsurface injection, like I showed with the Vanderland plants or that Orange County does, there are specific requirements in the regulation to remove 1,4-dioxane. There's a whole set of elements in the regulations all about 1,4-dioxane. And the reason for this is it's not removed, as Ann Cooper said, biologically, and it also slips right through reverse osmosis membranes, which take out almost everything in the water. So those regulations require a half-log removal, which means about 69% of the 1,4-dioxane present in the water has to be removed during that treatment. So not only do you have to put an extra treatment to remove the 1,4-dioxane, there's monitoring. You have to demonstrate that your unit is operating properly. You have to do challenge tests, that sort of thing. So it's very expensive to add this additional layer of treatment onto it. And then for our projects that do surface application, the standard is meeting the California notification level of 1 microgram per liter. If you're doing a subsurface injection project, you have to meet that at end of pipe. If you're doing surface spreading, the regulations call for you to meet it in the recharge water after it's gone subsurface. But our current permits require us to meet that limit at end of pipe at our treatment plants. And then, of course, there's the EPA number of 0.35 micrograms per liter that Ian Cooper mentioned. So we began doing a lot of sampling of 1,4-dioxane in the 2011 timeframe, which is right around the timeframe that notification level came into play. So we needed to understand it better and really characterize it because we had to meet these as a standard for our groundwater recharge plants. So we went out and we sampled at 9 of our different wastewater treatment plants. The one you see on the far side, JWPCP, is our ocean discharging plant. So right now, no recycled water is used at that plant. All that water goes out to the ocean. The other ones that you see listed are all water reclamation facilities producing recycled water. And, you know, one of the interesting things about our system is we have so many different treatment plants that when we go and sample them all, we can get a really quick and easy determination as to the nature of the sources. So if we see wildly varying concentrations at our various treatment plants, that immediately points the finger at industries. So it's probably coming from one or two, a few industries that are discharging high concentrations. When we see similar concentrations across our treatment plants, that means that it's just the concentrations are driven by some sort of widely distributed source that's the same all around the basin. And for us, that means households, potentially commercial applicators. So it's just an immediate fingerprint. We can go out, we can run these initial samples and say, oh, we've got a very widespread problem. It's coming from some sort of consumer product. Let's go try to track down where it's coming from. So the one large industrial source that at our joint water pollution control plant is a membrane manufacturer. And those are the known biggest wastewater sources of it. And I'm sure Mark from Orange County will talk about that as well as us. So we have an eye on that one. If we need to reduce concentrations at joint plant, we are looking at regulating them if they put out enormous concentrations of 1,4-dioxane. So let's take a harder look at our water reclamation plants now. Once we can see it a little better now that we take off that big spike from our joint water pollution control plant. So this graph shows the concentration of 1,4-dioxane on the y-axis, and then our different plants across the bottom. And then each different color is a different year. So if you look at our Long Beach plant, on the one end, you've got the red and the green and the purple. So that's sort of a time series of it. And so what you can see from this graph right away is that, again, even when we dial in, we see very consistent concentrations across most of our treatment plants. It looks like for that one LC, that's our Los Coyotes plant, there may be a few industrial sources, more minor ones at that plant, maybe a tiny bit at Long Beach, but again, we're seeing very, very consistent concentrations across our treatment plants. And then another thing we did with this data was we didn't just look at the effluent from the plant. We looked at the concentrations of sewage coming into the plants. That's shown in the gray. We call that raw. And then the purplish blue is our primary treatment. So that's after just a gravity settling treatment step. The secondary treatment in the dark orange is after biological treatment, where microorganisms eat the dissolved organic material in the water. And then the lighter orange is our tertiary water, where the water goes through a filter after you're done. And for each of these, we have 5 of our different water reclamation plants here. And you can see that the concentrations are remarkably similar across the plant. We really aren't getting any removal through gravity treatment, biological treatment, filtration. The 1,4-dioxane just isn't sticking to any of it. Okay, and another way to look at our data is to do a time series. So what we're showing here is concentrations at our various water reclamation plants from 2011 until 2018. And you can see that we're not really seeing a big time trend on it, that the concentrations bounce around a little bit, particularly at Los Coyotes, where we think we have an industrial source, but really they're staying relatively steady over the time period that we've examined. So here's a look at the water reclamation plants that feed our Montebello Forebay groundwater recharge project. So that's our Pomona, our San Jose Creek, which is the one out back here. We have 2 sides to it, east and west, and then our Whittier Narrows plant. And this shows the data for those plants from 2016, 2017, and 2018, as compared to that California notification level of 1 microgram per liter. And you can see that we're right on the edge of meeting that standard. It's actually rounded to 1. So we actually have snuck under and we're meeting that number right now, but we're really right at the edge on meeting that number. If the number drops down and gets revisited by the water regulators to the EPA IRIS number, then we're going to have a problem. And this would necessitate adding additional treatment to all of our water reclamation plants, and that would be at considerable cost to add that extra treatment step to these 3 water treatment plants, water reclamation plants. So we're nervous about 1,4-dioxane, but hanging in there right now. So here's the takeaway messages I got. 1,4-dioxane is ubiquitous at our treatment plants, so we really believe there is some sort of consumer products are driving it. 1,4-dioxane is not removed through tertiary treatment. The concentrations are remaining relatively steady. We do have some industrial sources at some of our treatment plants. We're right now at the regulatory level at our Montebello Forebay plants. And if the regulatory standards go down, that would necessitate additional treatment at our water reclamation facilities. So that's it. Thank you. Want to take questions now?
Yeah.
So would you have to install AOP at all your plants if you went down to the?
Yes, we would.
Do you guys have costs for that? Have you figured that out yet?
No, we don't cost that.
What's the total volume of the wastewater going through your plants?
The Pomona plant right now runs about 8 to 10 MGD. San Jose Creek, between the east and the west side, runs about 50 to 60 MGD. And Whittier Narrows is running 8 to 10 MGD. And our Whittier Narrows plant does do disinfection with UV, but you can see that that's not doing it. Yeah, it's the AOP. You have to add something to it.
Have you guys talked to, we just put in AOP systems for LAPP.
Where?
Have you talked to them at all on what these costs would be on these volumes for AOP?
No, we haven't done that yet.
You have costs from Vanderlands.
Yeah, well, that has, we could put a design request to get a sense of that cost. But hoping to not have to do it, so we haven't costed that out. It would be cheapest at Whittier Narrows because they've already got UV in, so presumably it'd be easier to retrofit that to some sort of AOP process.
You mentioned reverse osmosis. How many of the plants are using that?
None of our water reclamation plants have reverse osmosis in place. Just the Vanderlands plant is run by Water Replenishment District, and they do the advanced treatment specifically for that subsurface injection. Okay, well, good, thank you.
Thank you, Ann. So now we will be hearing the presentation of Engineering Supervisor of the Resource Protection Division of Orange County Sanitation District, Mr. Mark Kawamoto.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having the Orange County Sanitation District here. So I'm here to tell you today about our story about 1,4-dioxane. And I'll say it dovetails very well into Anne's presentation as well. So it was not a coordinated effort. It's our story. Similarly, I'll start with a brief overview for those of you who are not aware about Orange County Sanitation District. The Orange County Sanitation District, unlike our name, actually only serves the north and central Orange County. So South Orange County will be below this Irvine area. We have two main reclamation and treatment facilities. One is plant number one, is the reclamation facility. It's right next door to the Orange County Water District where GWRS is located. And we also have a treatment facility closer to the beach, and that's our Huggington Beach facility. So this is what we would say is our service area. However, we have agreements in place with other agencies, so we actually provide service that goes throughout the whole Santa Ana watershed, because there's a brine line that goes into the Inland Empire area. Plus, we do receive hauling waste from SAQA, which is in the South Orange County area. We do the pre-treatment program for IRWD, and actually on the border with LA County Sanitation District, there's some flows that crisscross on the edge there. So in total, the area that we serve is much greater than our technical service area. So one of the things that we're known for is our partnership with the Orange County Water District. So together we jointly implement the groundwater replenishment system. So we're currently at 100 million gallons of water that's being recycled per day. We're on our way up to 130 million gallons. And you can see at the bottom of the slide the typical treatment process for the GWRS, the groundwater replenishment system. So we do the microfiltration, the reverse osmosis, and then the ultraviolet light plus hydrogen peroxide is what we call advanced oxidation. Okay, so I'm in what's often called the pre-treatment program. Technically, what the pre-treatment program was created for was to help manage sources of pollutants before they enter the sewer. The traditional pre-treatment program was particularly targeted at specific industrial users, but with the advent of the groundwater replenishment system, OCSD made a decision that it understood that there may be other sources of contaminants that we would have to deal with that are beyond what we would normally control through the pre-treatment program. So that's where the non-industrial source control program comes into play. And that's the particular group that I'm in and I'm overseeing. But as you can see, so we understood that in addition to certain kinds of industries, there's a bunch of other industries that are not covered under the traditional pre-treatment program, plus the residential and commercial discharges. So there's some examples of some of the pollutants that are sent in from those various industry types or various groups. So here's the heart of what I want to show you today. So I'm going to show you this slide, and it looks very, very busy, but I'm going to step you through this story of how we chased down 1,4-dioxane. So let me start with a few orientation remarks first. One, you notice the title of the slide is that this is the groundwater replenishment system, GWRS, Q1 point. Q1 point is the custody point. It's the point at which OCSD's treated secondary effluent is sent to GWRS. So it's GWRS's influent, or our effluent to them. So our treated effluent to them. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. So we're looking at 1,4-dioxane concentrations at that particular point. For reference, the second arrow shows you the Orange County Sanitation District and the Orange County Water District established a level of service, an LOS, of 10 micrograms per liter. So that's the level that we are obligated, OCSD is obligated to send the water over. So as you can already see, we weren't always successful, at least at some point in time. And then to reference back to the notification level, just for reference, at the bottom of the slide is that 1 microgram per liter notification level, previously set by the California Department of Public Health and now the Division of Drinking Water. Okay, so as you can see, GWS started January 2008. And as you can see, we were doing well for a while. Some things started to happen in 2009 where you see the numbers start to spike a bit, especially when it goes over the level of service. But this to me is real data. There's some fluctuations. Well, as we came into the 2011, 2012 era, we see that now the spikes are happening more frequently and at a higher level. By the time we got to 2012, we have a very serious issue on hand that we're constantly exceeding our level of service, and it's going higher and higher. So at this point, we start to hunt. What is causing this 1,4-dioxane spikes? I should mention that up front, based on a rough calculation, we believe we were hunting for a total of 15 pounds of 1,4-dioxane. So I have a colleague that basically puts it this way. It's a small waste paper basket full of 1,4-dioxane. That's how much we're trying to trace down in our system. Okay? So here's how we approached it. As I mentioned, GWS is fed by our reclamation plant number 1. We have 5 main trunk lines that feed plant number 1. And this to complicate things more, 2 of our trunks are actually intertied. So the New Hope and Euclid trunks actually have interties in between them. So sometimes it's difficult to distinguish where the pollutant might be coming from or being discharged to. But we started to sample in our trunks, and we discovered that 2 particular trunks stuck out. One is our sunflower trunk, where we estimated there were 6 pounds of 1,4-dioxane being discharged. And in the Euclid New Hope trunk system, there was 5 pounds. So already we have a major amount of the 15 pounds we're looking for. Okay. So under the pre-treatment program, one of the things that we know to do is then, I'm going to go forward, well, what are the potential sources of 1,4-dioxane? So we have information on hand, and so we consult our information, and we looked up, and sure enough, as Ann mentioned, membrane manufacturers are one well-known source. They're also used for pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, pesticides, paper. It's also found in the personal care products previously mentioned. So in the case of the sunflower trunk, we were immediately we know we had one on permit. So we sampled covertly there, and sure enough, we found that they were the ones discharging a large amount of 1,4-dioxane. So that took care of the sunflower trunk. Now, for the Euclid New Hope trunk lines, that was a little bit more intricate work. So we actually had to step up the trunk lines zone by zone. So we looked for key points where we could isolate the trunks and try to determine in which areas. Meanwhile, we started to look and see, well, what kind of facilities are discharging in these areas? So there were several that stood out. There were other membrane manufacturers and distributors, a couple of electronics facilities, 1 metal finishing place, and 1 soap and detergent manufacturer. So unfortunately, at arrow number 7, we saw a sudden drop in the concentration of 1,4-dioxane that we were able to detect. We believe at that point then our covert operations had been discovered, or at the very least the word had gotten out, and so people started to change their practices. So at that point, we changed from covert operations to overt operations. We basically went on site and we had conversations and we worked with these people. Well, the good news is after all that work, in the case of the membrane manufacturer, their first step was to stop discharging. So they basically did thermal destruction, or basically evaporation of their wastewater so that it wasn't being sent to the sewer. Eventually, they did a product substitution where they used a different chemical in lieu of 1,4-dioxane for their membrane manufacturing process. Bottom line, you can see that it was very steady, that we're now consistently under 5 micrograms per liter. I will say that you might be wondering what's happened since then. It's consistently been below 3 micrograms per liter. So we believe that so far that things are under control. So one of the tools we have to protect our facilities is in the pre-treatment program, we can set local limits. So as it turns out, with every MPES permit cycle, we're required to do the technical evaluation of local limits. And so, of course, one of the constituents we targeted was 1,4-dioxane. In 2016, we adopted a new local limit for 1,4-dioxane. So I'm showing you the list here. As you can see, we set a local limit of 1 milligram per liter. This was a heroic effort because we went through a lot of efforts. Otherwise, if we did a uniform distribution, the number would be much, much less than this. But for those places that are known to use or work with 1,4-dioxane, we set a 1 milligram per liter. And as you can see, the basis for the whole limit is to protect GWRS in this case. I will say, one of the important things here also with this slide is when we're doing the technical evaluation of local limits, we determined that 80% of our influent was based on domestic discharges. For pre-treatment programs, this is really bad news because what this means to us is in a pre-treatment program, this is uncontrollable. This is what everyday residents are using. So there's not much that we can do in a pre-treatment world. So we can try to do education and outreach. We can try to work with legislation and regulation. But that's why I'm happy that, I want to support the Safer Consumer Products Board. I've been a long-time advocate just for this aspect because there's certain things that wastewater treatment plants can't do, pre-treatment programs can't do. And this is where we need your help to help control 1,4-dioxane. So, in summary, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity and for helping us work on 1,4-dioxane. You might be saying, does it really matter? Yes, small quantities add up, so small changes can have significant impacts. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
What kind of membranes are being manufactured?
Would you believe it's the membranes that are used for reverse osmosis? Very ironic, but right? Yeah. So 1,4-dioxane is used to help induce porosity in membranes. So all the things that it allows through 1,4-dioxane.
The irony, right?
Yes. Anything else?
Thank you, Mark. So at this time, we will take a break of about 10 minutes. I will also encourage you all, if you want to do a public comment, to take this time to grab a card, and we can do that after the presentation. So we are going to continue. I know I've just been informed that there's a couple of questions that have been sent to the chat feature. Unfortunately, we're not able to check that. If you can please, if you're tuning in remotely, if you can please send those comments to saferconsumerproducts@epsc.ca.gov so that we can answer those questions. At this time, I would like to invite Jeff O'Keefe, Chief of the Southern California Section, Division of Drinking Water of the State Water Resources Board, Control Board.
Hello. Yes, I'm Jeff O'Keefe. I'm with Division of Drinking Water. We call ourselves DBW for short often. We were formerly with the Department of Public Health, CDPH, and for about the last 5 years, we were moved over to the Water Board to align ourselves with the other programs that deal with water and wastewater. I'm located in our Glendale field office. We have field offices throughout the state. So my responsibility is regulatory oversight for public water systems in LA County up to San Luis Obispo County. I just want to acknowledge some of the sources I used today and some people that I borrowed from. Brian Bergenos, it does say brain. He is a smart guy. That's a typo. But I borrowed from Water Board fact sheets, EPA fact sheets, and some people within our program helped with some of the information. I also Got some information from the city of Los Angeles and the city of Monterey Park on a couple of the projects that they're working on right now to treat for 1,4-dioxane. So I have the benefit of going for a visit, so a lot of what I have is a repeat. So yes, I do want to point out though the use as a stabilizer in solvents or as a solvent, because I do have some slides related to some groundwater remediation projects from that type of disposal. Present in a number of products. We've mentioned some of these consumer products before and some of these other industrial uses. And it's a byproduct of manufacturing of PET plastics, classified as possible human carcinogen, and it gets into the environment and it can be harmful to people by ingestion, inhalation, and dermal exposure. So there's properties that make it troubling in the environment when it reaches groundwater. It's very soluble, it migrates rapidly, relatively resistant to bioremediation. It does not absorb onto the soil particles. And we see co-occurrence in some other volatile organic plumes from some industrial sites. And it sort of moves faster and expands more than the other chemicals. And it's difficult to treat because most typical groundwater treatment processes don't remove it, like GAC, granulated activated carbon, air stripping, it doesn't remove it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the occurrence data and had some similar slides about the data sets. We have voluntary monitoring. There's no formal monitoring requirements by California regulation. But we have some of that information. I have that in tabular form. It's fairly similar to the information previously presented. And we also have from EPA, they do these periodic, what they call unregulated chemical monitoring rules, where they develop a candidates list and they do select areas throughout the state are required to monitor. And they use that for collecting occurrence data and helping them to make decisions on future drinking water regulations. So from that data set, about 3% nationally were detected above their EPA health advisory level, little higher occurrence in California, and about 7% of public water systems had at least one result that was over that level. That's national. And it was also found in surface waters and groundwaters, and again, in wastewaters, as we've have previously discussed. So this table is just the voluntary data from the state's database. We see high amount of occurrence in Los Angeles with some of the higher concentrations detected, and Orange County coming in second. And we don't really, and the difference between my slide and Ann's is I screened out if it was like a single detection, I threw that away. It had to be confirmed more than one detection above the 1 part per billion or microgram per liter level. And I screened out things that were not used for drinking water. We might have monitoring data that's not actually an active in-use drinking water source. But, you know, the numbers fairly correlate to Ann's occurrence information. And this is a national map from the EPA unregulated chemical monitoring rule. And just point out, they use very low detection limits for this monitoring requirement, much lower than the state's reporting limits. So I would want to just kind of focus on the yellow and the red areas. And what's interesting about this slide is there are some clustered areas in the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, and Southeast, and in Southern California, where we have the highest amount of occurrence. And I want to thank Eurofin's lab for this slide. This was a graphic prepared by Andy Eaton. So just a little history of what the state's response has been. We first detected it in groundwater in 1998, and shortly thereafter, our toxicologist reviewed the available health information, and we established a non-regulatory number called the notification level. That's a health-based guidance level. At that time, the EPA health advisory was higher than it is currently. It was at 3.5. So we established our state notification level at 3 in 1998, and later revised it in 2010 when the EPA lowered their health advisory number. So at that time in 2010, we lowered it to 1 microgram per liter. So like I said, notification level is a placeholder. It's used when there's chemical of health concern that is lacking a formal enforceable standard maximum contaminant level. And it's set typically at a level that corresponds to a 1 in a million theoretical cancer risk value. We do have another value which is set at a higher level where we recommend more immediate action. That's called a response level. It's typically for cancer-causing chemicals. It's set at 100 times the notification level. In this case, it's set at 35 micrograms per liter. And we don't have any drinking water sources in the state that are above that value that are in use. More recently, this year, we are now starting what might be the beginning part of a formal rulemaking process to establish a maximum contaminant level. And the first step is through our sister agency, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, through Cal EPA. They have to review all the literature, all the available health information, health studies, and they establish what's called a public health goal. Now, often it would match the EPA's 1 in a million cancer risk value for cancer-causing chemicals. But they're just beginning that process. It may take 1 or 2 years for them to complete that, and that has to go out through a public review process. But once that is established, that would be sort of the starting point of where my program makes a decision on proceeding with formal rulemaking process to establish a maximum contaminant level. And we have to consider factors like whether there's technology capable of removing it in drinking water, what the costs associated with that is, and are there labs that are capable of analyzing it. Just a quick mention, there's no federal MCL. The EPA, after each UCMR round, they're supposed to do what's called a regulatory determination, where they determine, is there high enough occurrence, is it widespread throughout the nation, and would there be a meaningful health risk reduction by regulating that chemical? EPA has not made the decision on 1,4-dioxane yet. And they're in the process of doing that for PFAS and PFOA, which was also part of the same round of monitoring. And from the UCMR 1, EPA made a regulatory determination to regulate perchlorate, and they have not yet formally finished that process. They're just now out for comment on a range of potential MCLs. So this is a slow process. So lacking a federal number, many states toxicologists review the literature and they come up with their own values of what they think is considered to be a safe level of drinking water. As you can see, they vary quite a bit. And we're seeing this repeat with the PFAS chemicals, where each state has a different interpretation of the literature. Many of them are close to the EPA health advisory, but Alaska's as high as 77. I'm not sure how they developed that number. So I'm going to talk first, the next couple of slides, about the drinking water treatment projects, and then I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about the wastewater reuse projects. So we haven't yet talked really about another big source that has impacted drinking water. That is these contaminant plumes that are present at a number of EPA Superfund sites or EPA managed cleanups, and they have impacted drinking water. They tend to have higher concentrations than what might be influenced from wastewater. And it's present in the San Fernando Valley. These are all LA areas, San Gabriel Valley. We have a number of projects that have already been completed. These are very complex treatment plants that are addressing multiple chemicals, multiple volatile organics, perchlorate, nitrosamines, and also 1,4-dioxane. Not all of them have all of those, but many of these sites are treating for all those chemicals through multiple treatment processes. The next couple of slides will be about a current 2 projects we're currently reviewing. We're in the permitting stage. That's the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power's North Hollywood plant and the City of Monterey Park plant that's in the South El Monte operable unit, not too far from this location. So this is a plume map of the 1,4-dioxane in the San Fernando Basin. The City of Los Angeles has several wells just on the leading edge of that plume. As part of a multiple efforts, there'll be some source remediation that will not be used for drinking water, and there'll be this this containment system that is treated and used for drinking water, and will also protect down gradient wells from also being impacted. So the treatment process that LA is using is advanced oxidation, UV AOP, with peroxide addition. And since the process is capable of removing multiple volatile organics plus 1,4-dioxane at the same time, there's site-specific design parameters depending on what's in the water. This is very different than the water that Orange County or LA County San is treating. And then since you add a very high dose of peroxide and there's excess leaving the process, you have to have a secondary process called GAC, carbon filtration, that will remove the excess peroxide, and it also is an additional barrier that can remove any maybe low-level volatile organics that might be present. It's just more of a reliability feature for the organics. And then it will go out to the distribution system. This is Monterey Park's project. These, not a lot to look at. It looks like a pipe. These the UV lamps are inside that pipe, and there's a peroxide addition. It's added right to the pipe. It mixes through the turbulent flow in the pipeline, and the UV and the peroxide react together and form the radicals that reduce the concentrations of the organics and the 1,4-dioxane. So this Monterey Park project is treating for multiple volatile organics and 1,4-dioxane, fairly moderately low levels of 1,4-dioxane. It can be as high as 5 micrograms per liter. And they've completed some testing to demonstrate that you have complete reduction of all these chemicals through the process. So they've demonstrated you can use this process to address multiple chemicals at once. But one thing is the peroxide dosages that these type of projects use versus the wastewater projects is you have to use a much higher peroxide dose, which means you need this carbon filtration step afterwards. And if there was a project where we didn't have to use that high of a peroxide dose, there's an easier way to quench the excess peroxide by just adding chlorine that will react with the peroxide and remove it. So like I said, these projects are very site-specific. They're very involved with the design phase, and you have to look at what's in the water. Now remember, this water isn't first going through reverse osmosis, so it's definitely a different water quality than Orange County and LA County sand. And things like total alkalinity, bicarbonate, any kind of color in the water from organics, any chloramine, TOC, these things will sort of interfere with the production of the hydroxyl radicals and will compete for removal with the other things that you're trying to treat for. I have a couple numbers for costs just for these two current projects we're working on. North Hollywood project, it's fairly high flow plant for a groundwater treatment plant. It's going to cost $21 million. They have even a larger scale plant in the planning phases, Rinaldi, Toluca. That's going to be, $37 million. And Monterey Park, they had the benefit of having a developed site that already had treatment facilities. They already had carbon vessels there. So they had some cost savings there, and their project was a lot lower. I was reading Long Island has 1,4-dioxane present in their groundwater sources too, and I saw some numbers. They were building a plant that's going to cost about $4 million. These costs vary depending on how many reactors you need, what's the influent water quality. But you're not done. Once you build it, you then have to operate it and maintain it. And these plants are very expensive to run. They use a lot of energy. These UV lamps are higher. The newer lamps are less energy intensive, but generally speaking, the energy costs and the chemical costs, peroxide is very expensive to operate. And I don't have values for that, but that's certainly something that you need to consider when a water utility is building a plant. They need to make sure that they have water rates that are able to sustain the system, that they can pay for the operations of it. So AOP works. We know that. We have some pretty good track record on these 9 or so plants. But it needs to be pilot tested. You need to demonstrate it at startup and demonstrate that it's effective. So switching gears, I'm going to talk a little bit about reuse, and some of this was covered by Ann Heil from LA County Sand Districts, but I just want to go over the history. We had many versions of a draft groundwater recharge and replenishment regulation. These are the regulations that we currently adopted in 2014, but sort of on the leading edge of the nation of how to develop criteria to make sure that these projects are safe and don't have some unintended consequences. And in an earlier draft, we weren't aware that 1,4-dioxane would be a problem. Orange County had done some sampling of their drinking water sources in the early 2000s. They found it, and then Orange County Sand District, Orange County Water District worked together, worked with the state, and worked on a strategy to address it. And then we subsequently changed our draft regulations to include what's called full advanced treatment for the subsurface injection projects, to include reverse osmosis and advanced oxidation. Subsequent to that, we have a new set of regulations called the surface water augmentation regulations, and these same requirements would apply to that type of project. And I don't tend to, give you a lecture on the process, but I have a few slides that talks about the process. So the full advanced treatment includes the reverse osmosis and the AOP. The AOP is good for the NDMA reduction, which can also be present in the treatment process, but it's also good for the 1,4-dioxane reduction. And it's a good barrier for low molecular weight chemicals that pass through the reverse osmosis process. So even though we know it's removing 1,4-dioxane, it may be removing things that are unknown also. So I think I covered this. RO can remove the larger molecules, but not these smaller molecules like 1,4-dioxane and NDMA. These have fairly low molecular weights. So that's why the advanced oxidation process is effective at these lower molecular weights. Anne did cover this. We do have requirements to meet the to meet all MCLs and notification levels to prevent degradation to the aquifer. And 1,4-dioxane is a good indicator for other organics, other unknowns, other chemicals of emerging concern. And it's a good indicator for that. So I'm not an expert on this, but the peroxide in the presence of the UV light forms the hydroxyl radicals, and that's what is reducing these organic molecules. We have a lot of information from Orange County Water District and now the Vanderlands plant at LA County Sand. But there's some new studies going on to use an alternative to peroxide that we're still learning more about. That's using free chlorine in addition to the UV rather than the peroxide and UV. So we're still learning more about that, but that's also showing promise and will be cheaper to operate. So the dosage is now, we're now at the point where we're trying to optimize and reduce the costs and determine the best dosage. It's very difficult to really quantify. One of the vendors has some algorithms that they're working on that will help kind of optimize the dosage. That's still not finalized yet, but we're working with industry on that. But typically the dose is about 3 parts per million or milligrams per liter compared to the drinking water treatment, which is a much higher dose. This is my last slide. So this just talks about what is the requirement of these reuse projects to what is the removal requirement and what is the demonstration test requirement and what's the ongoing monitoring requirements. So there's a spike test. They have to show half a log reduction through the process and establish the operating parameters at which the plant will operate. That's typically using the UV dose and a peroxide dose, power type dose, and those are monitored continuously to ensure that the process is working effectively. And then at the water produced, there's also a quarterly monitoring requirement to confirm that the MCLs and the NLs are met. I just have a few links to some references that I thought were very worthwhile. The Gamma fact sheet was in the back of the room. That was one of the handouts. I think so. And these others are not in the back of the room, but we have a web page where a lot of the information from our slides comes from about the history of the state's notification level. And EPA has a technical fact sheet that's also very worthwhile checking out. Any questions? Yes.
Jeff, one of the concerns I've heard about the AOP process is the potential to generate some oxidation byproducts.
Correct.
Are you finding anything? Does the activated carbon deal with that, or are there other issues? Anything of note that you've seen from the projects you've done?
Yes, well, we're still learning on that. A lot of the San Gabriel projects are using the UV at the tail end of the treatment process after the volatile organics are removed. But now there's a less likelihood of byproduct formation. But for the North Hollywood and the Monterey Park projects, yes, there was some studies done during the demonstration testing to determine what forms during the process and what happens after carbon filtration. And yes, there are a couple things, haloacetic acids, which is present in nearly every water supply because of disinfection, is present. But there's also a couple aldehydes that are present. And the literature does show that glyoxal is potentially formed. We didn't see it at these projects, but the aldehydes are removed. Acetaldehyde and formaldehyde can be formed, and so you have to make sure you have an effective barrier to remove that post-treatment. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I would like to invite Jane Williams, Executive Director of the California Community Against Toxic.
Good morning, still morning. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I work quite a bit on drinking water and groundwater in Los Angeles. And some of the points in here have already been covered. So I'm just going to flip very quickly through these slides, the ones that I've already covered. So this chemical is similar to some of these other chemicals that we're struggling with here in Southern California, in that they like water and they tend to get in water no matter where they are, whether they're in a consumer product, whether they're an industrial discharge, whether they're a source, say an old landfill or an old industrial site that was pre-RCRA. So this chemical is just one of many chemicals that we are very concerned about because they are water loving. The remarkable thing about this chemical is that one of the seminal studies, that the numbers that we're looking at is based on this study that was done before I was born. Okay, so this is not like, wow, we figured out this chemical is really toxic all of a sudden. No, actually, we've known that it was toxic for a long time. Here's the same chart that Jeff had. So I'm just gonna, here's the same map that someone else had. So very interesting when we look at these maps for PFAS, PCE, PCE, perchlorate, all these chemicals that we are working on, we see a similar pattern in Southern California, which is no bueno from an environmental justice perspective. LA. So this is the problem. This is the environmental justice problem. If you look at these water companies and where they are, and you look at CalEnviroScreen, and then you look at systems that are under 10,000, you will begin to see a picture where the communities that are going to be least able to pay for treatment for the contaminant is where the burden is going to be concentrated. And that is not just a problem with 1,4-dioxane. It's the problem with the solvents, it's the problem with PFAS, and there's probably a bunch of other chemicals that we're not regulating yet that we're going to find out in the future that we should be regulating. And so the burden is being concentrated in the communities that are least able to bear it. Ironically, many of these communities are either the Exide impacted communities or they're in Cristina Garcia's district, who's carrying the PFAS notification bill. So this issue of notification is very important because as I go around the state and I talk to people about groundwater and drinking water, even people who are fairly plugged into what's going on, most people do not read their consumer confidence reports. Most people do not know the difference between a notification limit, a PHG, an MCL, and I'm talking even senior staffers in the legislature. So this whole thing about how we're regulating water is a sort of mysticism to them. So I'm talking to you, Jeff. You and I understand it, but a lot of other people don't. These issues of the lack of regulation by US EPA in setting federal standards. So US EPA has not issued a new MCL for over 2 decades. I actually petitioned US EPA to set an MCL and regulate perchlorate before my son was born. Now he turned 18. And they have just now gotten their acts together to say we should do something about perchlorate. Now, if I had put up a map on perchlorate, you would see that we have entire groundwater aquifers in Southern California that have been abandoned essentially because of perchlorate contamination. And so now when you add the 1,4-dioxane contamination and you're going to add the PFAS on there and you're going to add solvents on there, I'll just keep saying this over and over again. Southern California, we have a huge problem. You can see the states are acting, in different ways to resolve this issue of a lack of federal standard setting. So I applaud the Safer Consumer Products Division of DTSC because you're actually getting at the problem upstream from where I see it. And I just want to reiterate to you how important that is. It's relatively easy for one of our colleagues that are at a sanitation agency or our friends at WRD or OCW. Those guys can track down industrial sources. But what you heard the one gentleman say in the back was 80% is coming from consumer products. And when we get into PFAS, we're going to be looking at a similar type of pattern. So we really need to get ahead of the curve. And the only way to get ahead of the curve is to really attack the sources. It's the irony of this problem, which, let me just get to this last slide. Here's the irony of the problem that I want to point out in this workshop is that US EPA has a program that allows the production and release of chemicals into the environment in the United States. It is supposed to be, it was basically supposed to solve the problem that PCBs created, right? PCBs were produced, they were in consumer products, they were in the environment, and everyone figured out, oh my gosh, they're super persistent, they're mobile in the environment, and they're toxic. And so TSCA was passed in 1976, and it was a political solution to get at this problem. But here we are, almost to 2020, and we clearly haven't gotten at the problem, because now, if you go and actually did non-target analysis of drinking water in Southern California, you're going to find a host of chemicals, not just 1-dioxane, not just perchlorate, not just PFAS. You're going to find hundreds of chemicals that, as we learn more about the toxicity and of what's in our drinking water, and we look at the patterns of disease and these activities on these different systems, we're going to say, why didn't we get ahead of the problem? Why didn't California say to itself, drinking water and our water resources are so important that we need to restrict some chemicals use? And oh, by the way, I almost forgot, we actually did that. It's called the Porter Cologne Act, right? And Jeff has been to a number of groundwater convenings that we've held, and I always start off with the same thing. Did you know that at the turn of the last century, there were 2 capital offenses in California? Only 2. The one, my favorite, was stealing a man's horse. Because most people who love me know I love horses, I rescue horses, and I have horses, right? The second one was poisoning someone's well. Those were the only 2 capital offenses in 1899. And we went from there to here, where I could, put up maps of here's perchlorate contaminated aquifers, here's 1,4-dioxane, now it's going to be the PFAS. It's like, how do we go in 100 years from one to the other? So I just want to conclude by saying I applaud you guys getting ahead of this problem, looking at these in consumer products, and I encourage you to look at your safer consumer products through this lens of not only what, like you did with the PFAS and the carpets, of protecting kids' health, but also looking very carefully and clearly that what are some of these chemicals that we know are getting into drinking water, and we know are persistent and are toxic already. This chemical is very interesting to me because we knew it was toxic before I was born and we didn't do anything about it. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for all the presenters who came before me, where I did not have to fill in all these great details. I could just more editorialize on the bigger, larger problem. Thank you.
Are there any questions for the students? Thank you, Jane. I would like to now invite Senior Policy Strategist of the Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, Nancy Bermeyer.
Thank you so much. And I will start by apologizing for not actually having a PowerPoint. I didn't have a chance to put one together, so you'll have to bear with me and just listen to me talk. So thank you very much for the opportunity to come down and speak to you all. I did come down from Oakland this morning. Well, let me just first introduce you to Breast Cancer Prevention Partners. We're a national organization located in San Francisco. As our name suggests, we work to prevent breast cancer by getting chemicals linked to the environment out of consumer products and our communities. We do that based on a sound foundation of science, of the peer-reviewed science, to identify those chemicals, and then through policy, market campaigns, and public education, we work to address those issues. We are also one of the founding members and the current host of the Campaign for Safe Cosmetics. And as many of you may know, cosmetics is a term that actually does incorporate personal care products in the federal definition, and it just sounded better than Campaign for Safe Personal Care Products. And the campaign is a coalition of organizations and responsible businesses that are working to take toxic chemicals that are linked to cancer, birth defects, neurotoxicity, and other reproductive toxicity out of personal care products and cosmetics. And in that goal, we have been concerned about 1,4-dioxane for a very long time. So you've heard a lot about 1,4-dioxane in water, and I'm going to talk about it in consumer products, and one of the major sources, as we heard, for the contamination in the water. Because it turns out if you don't put it in the water, you all don't have the same trouble getting it out that you currently do. We have a little applause in the back, thank you. So again, you've heard a little bit about the health impacts. The last slide that Jane had up was kind of perfect. It's a carcinogen, and depending on who you talk to, it has various levels of likely, possible, probable, known to the state of California. Trust us, it's a bad chemical. It's linked to liver and nasal cavity cancers. It's general kidney and liver toxicity. And there is evidence that it promotes formation of mammary gland tumors in rodents. So it's a big concern for breast cancer. So that's why we care about it. It is formed in products through a process called ethoxylation. And that process helps to reduce the harshness of chemicals in personal care products and cleaning products. The specific ingredients, again, you saw a couple of different charts of the kinds of ingredients that are likely to be contaminated with 1,4-dioxane, sodium lauryl sulfate, the PEGs, the OLITs. There's a couple of different phrases or clauses you should look for in the number of chemicals on your personal care products. You won't know that about cleaning products until next year because I don't have to disclose cleaning product ingredients until California passed a law that says they have to do it as of 2020, so stay tuned on that one. And it's found in a variety of different kind of products, so lotions, shampoos, body washes, liquid and hand soaps, bubble baths, hair relaxers, sunblocks, and then various cleaning products. You could be exposed through inhalation, ingestion, whether through water or food, and absorption through the skin, which obviously is important for things like lotions that you put on your skin and leave there. And of course, we're not exposed to just one source of the chemical at a time. We all use multiple personal care products every day, sometimes slathering it on our body and leaving it there, sometimes rinsing it off and making sure all that dioxane goes into your water systems. You're welcome. Cleaning products, most of us don't use it every day, but there are communities that do. Domestic workers, janitors, hotel workers work with these products day in and day out, often without a lot of control about which products they use. So again, those folks are mostly women and mostly women of color. So it's an environmental justice issue around that. And then, of course, we're all exposed to the environmental sources. So the water that we've been talking about all day today. The EPA has a program called the Toxic Release Inventory, which tells us something about the amount of the chemical that's released into the environment. Not a complete list, because you have to hit a certain threshold before you have to report. But even given that, they estimate that 4.2 million pounds of this stuff is released into the environment. And that, again, doesn't include the exposures that you'll get from personal care products and cleaning products. That's a lot of a toxic that's out in the world. So we've actually done some, we've talked about the chemicals you might look for, the ingredients you might look for that suggest there might be 1,4-dioxane, but there's also been a fair amount of, or several product testing projects or research projects that have shown that, in fact, chemical is there. There was a study done in 2007 of a couple of Tide products that found 63 and 89 parts per million in two different Tide products. In 2007, the Organic Consumer Association tested a bunch of products that were labeled as organic or natural. Of course, the FDA doesn't actually regulate what you have to do to be able to use those claims, so they don't really mean anything, but consumers think they do. And in that testing, they found 46 of 100 products had detectable levels of 1,4-dioxane. And again, these are just the ones that are marketed as being natural or organic. By contrast, if you're certified organic, or one of the part of the testing was done is if it was certified by the USDA as being organic, they did not find any 1,4-dioxane, which speaks to the fact you can take this stuff out if you have the will to do it. In 2008, my organization, the Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, tested children's bath products. So we looked at baby shampoos, baby washes, a number of other categories of products. 32 of 48 of those products had 1,4-dioxane, detectable levels of 1,4-dioxane, including things that suggest to consumer safety, like Johnson & Johnson baby shampoo, Huggies bath wash, American Girl shower gel. So these are iconic names that consumers assume are safe, and yet we found detectable levels in 2008. In fact, in that testing, all of the bath washes and all of the bubble baths tested positive for this chemical. And then more recently, in 2017, we did a much smaller testing of 7 different cleaning products. And of those 7, we found detectable levels of 1,4-dioxane in 2 of them. They were in Totally Awesome and Fabuloso, which are products that you're likely to find in dollar stores, which again, located in low-income and communities of color. And then people have looked at the Environmental Working Group's Skin Deep database, which has shown somewhere around 22% of the products that they have on there have some level of 1,4-dioxane. And then our very own California Safe Cosmetics Program database has approximately 50 products that have been reported, including body washes, shampoos, and conditioners as having 1,4-dioxane. The interesting thing about that is it's a serious underrepresentation because they are not even required to actually report 1,4-dioxane because it's not an intentionally added product or ingredient. So we appreciate the voluntary disclosure of those companies, although I'm not sure they knew they were doing that. But the fact that there are still over 50 products in there, shows that this continues to be a problem. And I think it's a problem. I think some of these companies have cleaned up their act over time, so some of this data is a little bit dated, but it continues to be an issue that we need to address. So one of the sort of related issues that doesn't get talked a lot about is I mentioned the ethoxylation process, which is used to make certain chemicals less irritating, milder, also helps with solubility of things. The chemical that's used to do that is ethylene oxide. Ethylene oxide is a well documented breast carcinogen. It's also been linked to lymphoma, leukemia, and stomach cancer. But it's a chemical that we have really deep concern about, and that's how the 1,4-dioxane gets formed. Two of these ethylene oxide molecules come together to create 1,4-dioxane. And so that tells us that products that are contaminated with 1,4-dioxane may also have trace amounts of ethylene oxide in them, which goes to consumers. And then you have to think about the workers who actually make this stuff. So the workers in the plants that create the personal care products and cleaning products have to work with ethylene oxide, highly toxic chemical. And then, of course, the ethylene oxide has to be produced somewhere too, in plants around the country. And that's an environmental justice issue because there's been some recent activity by the EPA that has shown that there are communities that are way multiple times over the safe level for ethylene oxide. And the recent science from the EPA reduced the safe level to a lower level in terms of the science part of the EPA, but the policy side of the EPA would like to reconsider that because that science doesn't really fit with their priorities in terms of who gets protected by the EPA, whether that's consumers and the public or the chemical industry. So that, again, that's an ongoing EJ issue because people are fighting back against the EPA possibly revising that level to be less protective and therefore leaving these communities in danger. So let me just want to talk 1 second about sort of regulation or lack thereof. So personal care products and cosmetics are regulated by the FDA, and they have no standard for 1,4-dioxane at all. They like to suggest that what they've seen isn't a problem, but they don't regulate it. The EPA is considering 1,4-dioxane as one of the first 10 chemicals that will be considered under the new TSCA. So Jane mentioned that the bill was passed in 1976. It was just revised in 2016, and they had to pick 10 chemicals to start with, and 1,4-dioxane was one of those. However, given the track record of this EPA, there's not a lot of confidence that that's going to end up with a protective standard. So it's there, but I don't think it's something that people feel like is going to come out with the result that environmental health and environmental justice folks would like to see. In Canada and the EU, cosmetics with 1,4-dioxane are banned. So they have actually taken action. And just last week, the state of New York, and you had seen the maps that Jeff and Jane put up and showed a little grouping of dots in the Northeast. Long Island has a huge problem with 1,4-dioxane contamination. And the state of New York, or the legislature at least, just passed a bill that would ban sale of personal care products and cleaning products with levels of 1,4-dioxane above 2 parts per million by 2022 and above 1 part per million by 2023. They had a different standard for cosmetics of 10 parts per million, which I'm not quite sure how that all happened, but the state of New York has decided that the majority of their contamination is related to cleaning products. So I think that's why they were particularly cognizant of making sure that the cleaning products got down to 1 or 2 parts per million, or 2 and then 1 parts per million. Now, companies that use this ethoxylation process can remove it through vacuum stripping. It's a volatile organic compound, so they can take it out and they can, depending on how much they're willing to spend and how much time they're willing to take, I think they can get it down to quite low levels. But a number of companies have just changed the process and used a different ingredient, like seventh generation took out the chemicals that are related to 1,4-dioxane, and now they don't have any in their products. So clearly it can be done. We can just substitute the chemicals or use a different process. And I think, one of the tenets of the Safer Consumer Products Program is it necessary? And I think there's good information out there to say that in these products, it's not necessary. And given the money it takes to clean this up, the millions and millions we've just seen put up on the screen, seems a lot easier to just turn off the tap rather than take the time to remove it. I would want to urge the Safer Consumer Products Program both to take this issue up, but to use as wide a swath of products as you can under the law. So I would urge you not just to look at shampoos or conditioners, but to look at all personal care products and cosmetic and all cleaning products. It's the same process, same result. And if we can clean it up in one, we should be able to clean it up in other. And given the complexity of the process, having to do it iteratively for different smaller chunks of the broad category of personal care products would take way too much time. So with that, I want to say thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak. And if you have questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Nancy. We will now hear from our last presenter, Senior Director for the American Chemistry Council, Steve Risato.
Thank you, Manuel, and thanks to DTSC for allowing me to speak. First, want to say, in case you're wondering, unlike Jane, I was alive when that 1974 reference that she put up there was published, but I was only a teen, so I can't say I was particularly focused on the issue at the time. But suffice it to say that a lot has happened since 1974, and a fair amount has happened since California and US EPA have last looked at the toxicity of 1,4-dioxane. So what I want to do in these few slides is talk about what's happened since 2010, 2013, when California and EPA did their assessments. And including some research that ACC has just completed that we plan to share with DTSC and the world as soon as we get it sort of written up and published. So what do we know? What do we know about 1,4-dioxane in terms of its toxicity? And basically, as you've surmised, this is what underlies all of the discussion that we've had so far, is sort of what is the toxic level? What is the safe level? And how do we get there? So first, what do we know? 1,4-dioxane is readily metabolized at lower doses in rats, in mice, and in humans. But you see a saturation of that metabolic pathway at higher doses. And so then what happens is you start to accumulate the parent compound, 1,4-dioxane, in the blood and in the system. And there's also very clear evidence that dioxane and its metabolites are not genotoxic. So this is not your classic mutagenic reaction to cancer. There's some other non-mutagenic process going on. And as a result of that, we've heard sort of reference to EU and Health Canada. Health Canada, World Health Organization, and the European Union have concluded that the tumors that you see, the cancer that you see in the animals, forms only after the metabolic pathway is saturated. And therefore, it's a nonlinear threshold and a threshold mode of action, meaning that below a certain level, there's no activity. US EPA, on the other hand, in their 2013 risk assessment, which essentially mirrors the California's conclusions, said that, yeah, there's data supporting a threshold mode of action, but there's incomplete evidence that you see sort of the cell damage and cell regrowth that you would expect for a non-linear mechanism. That we don't have a clear idea of metabolism, and also that we don't see a cell growth, a burst of cell growth that would lead to tumors. So based on that, they said we got to go with our default linear assumption, which is essentially what they always do. So just to kind of demonstrate what difference that makes is if you take a standard, here's your lab data. When you do a linear approach, you draw a straight line to 0. With a nonlinear approach, you're following that curve, and you can see that you cross the x-axis well above 0. So below there, there's no effect. And also, your assessment of where that 1 in a million risk, which is the standard for carcinogens or probable carcinogens, is quite a bit higher. So that's the difference, and you can see it can make a pretty significant difference in terms of what your threshold is, what your safe level is. This obviously just a generalized curve. Now let me just to talk briefly about the pathway, this non-linear pathway for 1,4-dioxane, because it'll help you understand some of the data I present. And this is from EPA's IRIS assessment. And this is the most likely pathway that has been identified. Although again, the EPA said we don't have enough information so that we can affirm that this is the pathway. But basically, exposure to dioxane. Typical metabolic pathway breaks it down to the metabolite HEAA, and then you pee it out of your system. At a certain point, that pathway saturates. You get accumulation of dioxane in the blood. It then moves to in this case, the liver. You get either cell damage, liver cell damage, then cell regrowth, swelling, and tumor formation, or you go right to a burst of cell growth, swelling, and then tumor formation. So that is the most likely pathway for the carcinogenicity of 1,4-dioxane. So shortly after the EPA's assessment was released, a number of researchers, hit the wrong button, a number of researchers commissioned a reanalysis of the slides from one of the two cancer bioassays. The one that's a 1976 study. I was also alive when that was done, by the National Cancer Institute, and found evidence of both cell toxicity and proliferation along with the tumors in the slides. So we have evidence, and this is in both rats and mice, we have evidence that there is damage and regrowth that is associated with the formation of tumors. Now, the fact that the NCI researchers didn't report it is not because they missed it or they forgot. It's just basically at the time you only reported the most severe effect. So they only reported the tumors, and so it's not surprising that it wasn't reported as an observation in the NCI analysis. Now, the second bioassay was done in Japan, and so the researchers hoped to do some similar reanalysis, but it turns out there were no slides available. But they were able to get the lab reports that were then translated from Japanese to English, and then did a subsequent publication that added some additional insights into the toxicokinetics and threshold. And so both of these publications are available, and we certainly will provide them to DTSC. So we've got sort of insight now, new insight into the progression to tumors. Second question on metabolism. Now this is looking at liver cells, isolated liver cells that are incubated with various levels of 1,4-dioxane, and we've got it in the rat and the mouse, and it clearly plateaus. You're clearly at a point where you see the metabolite accumulating, breaking down rather quickly. At a certain point, it levels off. The pathway gets saturated, and you get the accumulation of dioxane. You can also see that the rat, it happens a lot faster in the rat than in the mouse. And we've seen similar results in human liver cells, in whole animal tissues. So this is a fairly classic pattern with dioxane in mammals. Now this is from the work that we have just completed. We did a 90-day study, sacrificed animals at 7, 28, and 90 days. This is first dioxin levels in the blood, and you can see, and these are the exposure levels for 7 and 28 days, basically no dioxin accumulating at all. Then at 90 days and at the higher exposure level, we see it jump up. So we're clearly seeing a saturation of the pathway here. We look at the metabolite. We see something similar. At 7 days, you see sort of a quick adaptive response, but at 28 and 90 days, the pathway just keeps tooling along, breaking down the dioxane to HEAA as much as it can, but clearly it's being saturated at the higher levels. Again, I've got further evidence of this saturation pattern. Then to talk about the third one of EPA issues, and that relates to this proliferative response. Basically, the damage stimulates the cells to reproduce quickly, rapidly, and in that process is when you get the tumor formation. So this again is from our new study. We did a standard kind of BRDU pump, which looks at proliferative response. And you can see at 6,000, this is just the ppm, the level, and this is drinking water study, see a significant burst of cell growth at 6,000, not in the lower levels and not in the earlier time periods at any dose. So again, at a very clear threshold right there when you start to see cell growth. We also did genomics analysis where we looked at sort of the genes, what genes are being turned on or turned off with exposure to 1,4-dioxane. And after 90 days at 6,000 ppm, we see this enrichment of all of these gene sets that were related to proliferation. So we have, for the first time, a real sort of genetic level, gene level confirmation of this proliferative response. So we have essentially addressed each of the three limitations in the database that EPA identified back in 2013 and that OHIA reiterated in 2010. So now I want to just kind of dig in a little deeper on this gene expression. One, just to give you a better sense, maybe a little hard to see, and also it's really cool data. I love this stuff. So this is 90 days. This is the five dose levels, and the red dots are when there's a significant change, either upregulating or downregulating the genes. You can see absolutely nothing going on at 40 and 200 ppm. Looks like what we think is an adaptive response at 60. Again, very little at 2,000. It's only really at 6,000 where you see much of a change at all. And again, sort of showing that there really is a threshold right here at 90 days, because again, not very little activity at the earlier time periods. Now, just for comparison, this is a more typical kind of pattern of gene expression. So you can see we're not getting an awful lot of activity with 1,4-dioxane, even at 6,000 ppm, a fairly high dose. So just to kind of summarize, again, this is EPA's schematic of this most likely pathway to cancer. We're clearly seeing a metabolic saturation, sort of not only at dose, but also at time period. So it sort of seems to be a combination. We are seeing proliferation very clearly, again, at the higher doses, the longer time periods. And we are also, in this case, we're not seeing the cytotoxicity, but we are seeing evidence of proliferation consistent with tumor formation. So we basically have really sort of answered all three of those questions. So why is this important in DTSC's activity? I think, it really gets to the heart of, one, first, an assessment of, is there an adverse impact that needs to be addressed? And then secondly, if it's still determined there is, what is that threshold for an alternatives assessment? Sort of what, as I demonstrated, with a nonlinear pathway, that threshold moves quite a bit further. And sort of as evidence, while you saw that EPA's health advisory level in drinking water for 1,4-dioxane is 0.35 parts per billion, Health Canada and WHO are at 50 parts per billion. So 100-fold difference because of that assumption of nonlinear versus linear. So it can really make a large difference in terms of what you decide is the level of toxicity in a particular dose. So thank you so much for the opportunity to present. I'm happy to take any question. Yes.
So I had a question on the BRDU study.
Yes.
Did you look for any markers for cell death, necrosis, or?
Yes, we did. Sorry, I forgot to mention. We did. We looked at we used caspase 3. This is all names I've heard. I can't tell you the details of it, but we really did not see a lot of cell death. And we have that data we can present, but it's just was not very picturesque. So we really weren't seeing the cell death that we thought we might see or that others suggested. It may be that happens over a longer time period. We only did it for 90 days, but we definitely did see the cell growth. Thanks. Other questions? Yes.
So when you were doing this study,
yes.
Just looking at your PPM results, these were all in mice, correct?
This is in female mice, and the reason we did that was because that was the most sensitive species in the EPA analysis.
Right. So when we're talking about getting up around 2,000, 6,000, did you guys take into any account like other effects besides just dioxane? I mean, if you start flooding the body with any chemical at such high concentrations, how are you accounting for whether it was actually caused by 1,4-dioxane or just by the fact that the body just couldn't process it, no matter what chemical it was?
Well, I mean, we are also looking at, lower doses. That's why we really took a lot of time figuring out what doses to use, because based on previous studies, we wanted to see if we can find, low doses to see what's going on for early. We also want to look at, can we find sort of where the saturation level is, and then sort of the doses where previously reported. We looked at, drinking water consumption. We looked at, all the other parameters, body weight, et cetera, and those will be in the report. No significant changes in those. Whether, I don't know what other impacts. I mean, obviously you're controlling for exposure to anything else, really just controlling for just dioxane exposure. So not likely that there are other parameters there. We did, the blood analysis. So if there was other stuff in the blood, we would detect it. So we can't eliminate every possibility, but I think we've done a reasonably good job to sort of really tie it to the levels of dioxin. Is that awesome? Yeah. Well.
So I just have one question.
Sure.
So is it a carcinogen, this chemical?
It is a rodent carcinogen at higher levels of exposure. I don't know that. The human data, the epidemiology data is fairly inconclusive, but as you know, we typically use the rodent data to determine what the likelihood of cancerous effects in the
Thank you, Steve. So this concludes the section for presentations from stakeholders. I would like to share that we are transitioning to public comment. Is there any public comments here in the room? Not at this stage. I've been informed that we don't have anything in our Safer Consumer Products email either. We, however, received one comment, and I will read this so that is part of the core report. So this was a public comment given by Arjun K. Venkatesian, Professor and Associate Director for Drinking Water Initiatives in New York State Center for Clean Water Technology of the Stony Brook University. And the comment says as follows. 1,4-dioxane is a persistent chemical and is difficult to remove by conventional water and wastewater treatment systems. The water providers will have to upgrade to advanced oxidation processes, AOP, to efficiently remove 1,4-dioxane from water. AOP involves the use of strong chemical oxidants, typically in the presence of UV light, to generate hydroxyl radicals. Some concerns associated with the use of AOP are below. AOPs are expensive systems that increase the cost of treatment significantly. Hydroxyl radicals are not specific to 1,4-dioxane and hence can react with other organics present in source waters that can generate unintentional byproducts. There is a lack of characterization of AOP byproducts, and some research indicates the formation of toxic byproducts. For example, phenolic compounds during AOP. Hence, there is a need for an additional polishing treatment step, for example, GAC, to remove them. Chemical oxidants, hydrogen peroxide, ozone, added in AOP systems are not completely consumed in the reactor, and hence high residual oxidants is present in treated AOP effluent. The oxidant is usually quenched using GAC. However, the presence of oxidant can have an impact on the GAC filter performance to remove byproducts. Also, an increase in DVP formation has been observed in AOP effluent when chlorine is used as the oxidant. Thank you.
Thanks, Manuel. So closing up, I have a couple of points I want to make. First, I want to express my thanks for everyone who attended today, both online and here. I really want to thank all our speakers for putting in the time and energy and sharing their wisdom and experience with us. It's really important. And I particularly want to thank my staff, who I am continually amazed with and proud of and thankful for every day. So thank you. And our colleagues, our Southern California staff who've supported us coming down here. Marcia and Manuel, thank you very much. But I wanted to take in closing, a thought, kind of stepping back a little bit, and sort of teeing up our next workshop. I think it's really important that everyone understand our regulatory framework and how it is very different from what DTSC does in its other programs and what most of our colleagues in other environmental and health organizations do. And this was not by accident. This was by design. You know, we're focusing largely on drinking water and water resources today, but as you heard from some of our speakers, is that this issue for 1,4-D crosses not just water, but exposure to people. It affects workers. It affects communities who are disadvantaged in a variety of ways that may be adversely or disproportionately impacted. And we have a framework generally where each of our state agencies and local agencies have a specific authority and responsibilities and things they can do. And they're relatively narrow. Our Superfund cleanup deals with hazardous substances. Our RCRA hazardous waste program deals with RCRA hazardous waste. And one of the things I'm thankful for today is that we have this collaboration with our colleagues in water here to not just focus on what is our specific authority, but what is the problem and how can we work together with all the stakeholders to address these problems that affect all of us. And that's an important concept because no one has a silver bullet. No one has all the answers or all the resources. But further, I think I was reminded in our last presentation is that our framework is very different. We, I think it was one of the speakers said that our fundamental question in the SCP regulations is it necessary? The fundamental question is not, have we done a full-blown risk assessment? Have we determined what action level is that is scientifically sound and within these parameters of traditional risk assessment? That's not a framework. And it's important to understand that because of all of these challenges that we have, both in terms of the scope of the problem, the multitudes of products that contain this chemical, the multitude of stakeholders that use it and on one hand benefit from those materials or they're from products that have a valuable use, for people who are designing alternatives to those chemicals, different ways to address those problems. There's a lot of landscape here, and it's not just about in a cleaning product or a personal care product. It's bigger than that. And so we're a small group in DTSC. And our hope is that the dialogue that we have, that the action that we'll take under our regulations, will put in the marketplace information that will help everyone, make decisions that can help manufacturers make products that work, that are effective, that are cost effective, and that are safe. The consumers to know what products are out there that they can choose, which are safe and effective. And for our regulators to deal with our challenges in meeting our responsibility to protect people and our environment in each of our silos in an effective way. And our framework really looks at working with all the stakeholders to take action to move forward in a progressive and positive way, notwithstanding the scale of the problem and huge amount of uncertainty at many levels. So that's our challenge, and we need your help. And so when we talk at the next workshop about marketplace, and we talk about our alternatives analysis threshold process, we're going to need input, and we're going to need understanding of how we're going to implement that within our framework, because it's very different. We're not going to be developing a risk assessment driven AAT that says if you're below this, you're okay. It's probably going to be something more of a functional definition that says if you're below this level for a variety of reasons, then you're out. If you're above it, you're in. And so there's science behind that, there's policy behind that, there's values behind that. So I've stepped way back into some big ticket issues, but it's really important that everyone understand the regulatory framework we're working with and understand that we're asking for your help to give us information to make it work. And so it's a big challenge, and we're really thrilled that all of you are helping us with that. And we'll look forward to seeing you hopefully either in Sacramento or online on the 21st at our next workshop. Please read the background document, give us your comments, questions. We're happy to move forward. And with that, we'll conclude our workshop today. So thank you very much.